Hello there and welcome to, I think this is week 6 of Atheism for Lent. And if you've gotten this far, congratulations, it's about to get easier. This is the last really heavy week and most of it's things to listen to. So there's not so much reading. I think last week there were a lot of reflections, a lot of reading. This week is listening to stuff. And what I've done is, because some of the pieces are longer, you'll get an email that will be for 2 days. So keep an eye on that, and it will be like a 45-minute talk. And you can listen to 20 minutes of it in one day, 20 minutes of it in the next. Or you can listen to it all, and I have an optional extra for the next day. So if you want new material for every day, you will get it. But you will notice, I think it's 2 of the emails this week cover 2 days. I always get people emailing me going, I didn't get the email for today, so just letting you know that. Now, what I want to do is take you on the journey that you've gone so far, right up to this present week. And I'm kind of doing that because this is very hard work. And what you're doing is very hard work, especially if this is your first time doing Atheism for Lent. So much material from first-rate thinkers and artists and activists, and it's just, it's very intense. But what happens is, if you give yourself to it, and we keep going over the same ground, it becomes easier and easier. And it's a little bit like one of those 3D pictures that you look at that looks completely nonsensical, and supposedly I've never actually been able to do it, but if you focus your eyes in a certain way and you look at this picture for a certain amount of time, these were popular about 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but about 20 years ago, these were very popular, and you would focus your eyes and then suddenly you would see the image. And in many ways, that's what hopefully will be happening gradually as you do this, and not even immediately. It might be a month or 2 down the line, but as you marinate on this material, it will become clear, I promise you. And so what I'm going to do is take you on this journey right up to the current week. So week 1, very simple, was the main arguments for the existence of God. So Atheism for Lent starts off with theism. Right, just to kind of this is the standard form of theism, which is we believe in God. Here's arguments for the existence of God. Right, we did that. Now, after week 1, every week subsequently is a form or a shape of atheism. So I haven't said that before, but I think it's important to say is that after the first half week, every week you have done so far is, as I say, a shape of atheism. And each shape of atheism is a little bit different. So we'll look at those and also what their relationship to the church is. So week 2 is standard atheism outside of the confessional church to a large degree. Obviously we have Jean Meslier in there, but these are critics of confessional Christianity, of institutional religion. And that's basically the shape of atheism that we are most aware of in the contemporary world, right? That's what you get when you watch YouTube mostly. You'll get the apologists and you'll get some new atheists or whatever kind of arguing back and forth. So that's the first shape of atheism you did. Then the second shape of atheism was within the church. So if that was outside the church, this is within. Well, what I'll say is kind of within and without, right? The mystics had an interesting relationship with institutional Christianity. They were generally within institutional Christianity, but they were often a bit of a thorn in the side, or given their own kind of space within the institutional church, sometimes viewed with a little bit of suspicion, sometimes rightly so. Some of these people were pretty mad, but they had a complicated relationship with institutional religion, but they were within that tradition. And the form of atheism that they expressed is this notion that the word God is a signifier for that which transcends signification, for a reality that saturates us, that overwhelms us, that short-circuits us. And so they embrace atheism as a spiritual purification process. that we have to introduce doubt and unknowing to all our conceptions of the absolute, because the absolute, by definition, is beyond our ability to compute, to understand. And religion then becomes a type of theopoetics, or a hymn of praise. It becomes a way of actually protecting the absolute from idolatry, right? So for them, idolatry, which comes from the same root word as ideology and eidos, which is getting the essence of something, right? So they wanted to protect us from the idea that we could get the essence of the divine. And theology, in a way, was not so much designed to name the absolute, but to dename the absolute in a variety of ways. One of the ways, by giving God so many names, and so many names that kind of clash together, that there's an unnameable dimension to that. And then also things like the tetragrammaton, the idea that God's name is unsayable. So various strategies that are used. So that was the second form of atheism that you encountered, this experience of awe, this, and it's not even an experience technically, it's what Jean-Luc Marion calls a counter experience. It's an experience beyond experience. It's like going blind by looking at the sun, right? You can't so much say that you see the sun, rather that the sun makes you blind, right? So that's the mystics. Then from there, we took a twist, because I think I said that in a way the mystics are the first spiritual but not religious, right? In that sense of, as much as that term means a spiritual experience that cannot be contained by religion, right? That's kind of what they're arguing for in a sophisticated way, right? The next week is a form of atheism that says, oh, we're interested in the religious bit, right? We're religious, not spiritual, right? That's where the interesting stuff is. Now, what you're seeing here is, in week 2, these were arguments against the existence of God, right? Week 1 was arguments for God out there. Week 2 were arguments that God out there does not exist, or that we would never know. The mystics, they were not making arguments for the existence of God, because they would basically generally say any argument that defines God is not defining God, is defining something that is other than God. That there's something about this proof stuff that just doesn't work. You either feel yourself overwhelmed by this otherwise than being, this hyper-present reality, or you don't. And they're not getting into kind of arguments. What they do argue for, especially someone like Marion, a philosopher, he argues that it is theoretically possible for someone to have an experience of absolute saturation, that there's nothing logically inconceivable or impossible about that type of experience. So someone like Marion and other mystics will argue not for the existence of God, or even that spiritual experience even exists. What they'll say is, it's conceivable that it exists, and if it does exist, we can say certain things about what it might look like. And then basically they leave it up to the individual to affirm or not that they have had that counter experience, that saturating, short-circuiting event. Then when it was the functional critiques, this is when we're into Marx and Freud and Feuerbach and others, then we, as I say, we get into this bit of going, well, hold on, the bit that you're getting rid of, that's the interesting stuff. Religion tells us something vital about us. And here's the thing that someone like Feuerbach would say is, if you have had a spiritual experience, that's fine. If you just don't talk about it and you just hold that, right? My dad was a little bit like that, actually. My dad was a very quietly religious man. And I only discovered later on that he was a deeply spiritual man, because he had a sense of this presence of something, but he never talked about it. Just never talked about it. And whenever I would have my born again experience when I was 17, and I was, preaching to everybody and trying to convert him. He just listened to me compassionately, and say years later I discovered that, he had this deep and abiding faith, but it was very, very quiet. But what the functionalists would say is, as soon as you speak it, as soon as you start talking about your spiritual experience, as soon as you put it into words and pictures and music, then you're putting onto it something of yourself, something of your language, your education, your community, which is very much what the mystics were saying. But these people are saying, well, that's what's really fascinating. Let's look at that. Let's look at what religion is doing in society, whether it's good or whether it's bad. What is its function? And so that opens up this really interesting world. Now, this is an atheism, but it's not an atheism that says God does not exist. It's existential atheism in a way. It's saying that, listen, we're not arguing for against the existence of something out there. What we're doing is we're looking at religion, and we're looking at the word God, and we're looking at what people mean when they say the word God and what that tells us about the world and ourselves. This is a move towards what can be called phenomenology, which is just a term to describe the idea that we don't really have access to what's beyond language and beyond our brains. We have access to our experiences, and we have access to our minds, and we have access to this whole world. And so what is going on when we talk about God? What is going on when we form religion? That's the question. So right from the mystics, that shape of atheism, arguments for and against the existence of God aren't really relevant. Then after that, for these functionalist critiques, they're not relevant at all either. And these people are all outside the church. So if the mystics were kind of inside, in but not of, this bunch that you looked at in the week of functionalist critiques, they're kind of all outside the church. Then we get to the existentialists, which is what you did last week. Isn't that right? Am I missing a week? So there's the theists, the atheists, the mystics, the functionalists, and then into what you did last week, which they could be called, in a sense, the existentialist theologians. And what did they do? What shape of atheism have they got? Well, their shape of atheism, these people are in the church, but most of the thinkers in last week are thinkers who are looking towards a different type of church. So I would say a different type of institution. So if the mystics, if in the first week people like Aquinas are within the institutional church, and then the mystics are in the institutional church, but they are in a kind of antagonistic relationship with that church, then last week's theological atheists are pointing towards a future institution, a next Reformation. And their atheism, they embrace the functionalist critique. All of the thinkers you looked at basically will go, yep, absolutely, religion reflects something of ourselves and our ideologies, our values, it's used and abused, etc., etc. The thinkers last week would be saying, however, that there's something going on in religion that cannot be reduced to some sort of evolutionary explanation, right? There's something going on in religious life that is otherwise than being, right? And this is probably most clearly seen in the work of Paul Tillich, right? So when Paul Tillich talks about ultimate concern, he says that, well, what you find in the religious life of people, and by the way, these thinkers are mostly going, religion is everywhere, right? This we haven't talked about this, but like the realm of religion, especially for someone like Paul Tillich, is like, well, we're all religious to a certain extent, insofar as we all have ultimate concern, right? We're different from most other animals, if not all other animals that we know. We're different from most of them in the sense of this experience of what can be called a non-pathological attachment, which means that to be human is to believe that there are some things that are more important than our own self-interest, than our own pleasure, than avoiding pain. This something that Kant would call categorical, a categorical imperative. Whether or not we ever live up to that or even can live up to that, set that at one side, but we feel it. We feel it in ourselves, and especially in experiences of love, we can experience an unconditionality that touches something that's beyond just the material conditions of the world, right? So, to put that in different language, well, with Paul Tillich, what religion in its essence is about is not them proving God exists or God doesn't exist. It's not even an experience of saturation, right? Because the mystics, often their experience is only for a few. Not many people get it. And it happens maybe rarely, once in your life or a few times in your life. And it might look very similar to a psychotic break or something like that, right? So, but it's mostly kind of very rare, and happens very occasionally, et cetera, et cetera. For Paul Tillich, ultimate concern is for everybody. Everybody has that. That's not a religious experience that is just for the few. That's like everybody has ultimate concern, even if they don't know it, right? It is always at work. You cannot escape it. Even trying to escape it, your ultimate concern is to escape meaning and concern, right? To try to not be concerned. So for someone like Tillich, the heart of religious experience isn't like in the shape of atheism with the mystics. It's not something, as I say, that is for the few. It's not even for the many. It's for everybody. And what a good religion does, what religion at its best does, is it focuses you on this ultimate concern while protecting you from reducing that to some finite thing. Now, this is quite complicated, but it's like saying, for Tillich, and I think I did talk about this, something like justice is about the world. If you commit yourself to justice and you become a human rights lawyer, for example, you're committed to justice. But what you also need to bear in mind is that you'll never completely get justice. There's a impossibility to that kind of drives you. It's a grounding. You're grounded in a justice that you can never adequately express. So it's not dissimilar from the mystics, because the mystics are trying to protect you from trying to say that you can understand this hyper-being God. And Paul Tillich is saying God is the ground of being, that we're all grounded in, and cannot be directly experienced or embraced, but is indirectly found in our commitment to the world. And so, particularly Bonhoeffer, but also Tillich, are pointing towards a type of institution that might be able to better do justice to those ideas, right? So reformations happen when there's a fundamental qualitative change in that religious tradition. So in Christianity, there's reformation when something fundamentally changes that makes you reread everything that's happened in the past. It's in continuity with the past, and yet a rupture and something brand new. So it feels new and old at the same time. Okay. Then that brings us up to this week. And this week's shape of atheism is similar to the previous week, but it's again a dialectic, so it's a new shape, right? Each of these is a different shape. This is where the thinkers, and we get up to present day, and people who are very influential to me. So we're going to encounter Slavoj Žižek, John Caputo, Todd McGowan, and Richard Boothby, right? Those are the four people that you're going to encounter this week. And they're all alive and mostly well, right? So they're doing good. They're still, and that means, by the way, there's loads of material out there that you can get on these thinkers, right? A lot of the earlier thinkers, there wasn't YouTube, there wasn't podcasts, especially with Žižek and McGowan. There's a world of stuff that you can get of theirs. So I'm just kind of introducing you to somewhere to start, and then if you enjoy it, you go off and you explore. Each of these thinkers agree with the existential theologians that there is something that is otherwise than being going on in the material universe. Because if you think of religion in a broad sense as an orientation to something otherwise than being, right? So that's a definition I'm giving you here, and I'll unpack it. But religion in its various forms, is an orientation to something beyond the total system of being. That covers a lot. So when I say otherwise than being or something outside the total system of being, a crude materialism says that everything is determined of natural cause and effect. There is a total system, and hypothetically, if you knew everything about the position, the velocity of subatomic particles, you could kind of know everything, right? There's a certain sense in which with an understanding of the basic movements at the beginning of the universe and a big enough mind to process it, there's nothing you couldn't know. In principle, everything is part of this determined, naturalistic, materialist whole. And religion, in its various forms, is oriented to saying that there is something in reality that is not reducible to material reality. Now, I say there's lots of ways you can unpack that, and this week is a particular way of unpacking what that means. And these are very sophisticated thinkers, really interesting thinkers, who are basically saying that there is a type of openness in the world, and that the religious impetus is to be sensitive to that openness, to stand in the storm of that openness, and to have fidelity towards that openness. And they do it in different ways. So for John Caputo, he is a post-structuralist, a postmodernist, and as such, he tends to think of religion as an openness to a call to love and justice and hospitality and mercy that you're never able to grasp. So very similar to what I was saying to Tillich, and John Caputo likes Paul Tillich a lot, in that he would say that whenever we talk about justice and love and hospitality, there is a dimension to those words that is open, that can be reinterpreted. Democracy is the same. Like, we can say something is democratic, but at the same time we can say, but it's a form of democracy, and there's undemocratic dimensions to that democracy, and we can kind of try to think of how to be more democratic. So, for example, you could say, well, if democracy is important in the modern world, and say America is a democracy, or has democracy within it, then can we expand democracy into the workplace? Because the workplace isn't democratic, right? And so you kind of you start to go, oh, so democracy isn't done, it's not over. There's maybe a potential for democracy to erupt in ever new ways. And Caputo's work is a beautiful invitation to always be open to this future that has not arrived. It's a very Jewish Christianity in a way, because you're waiting for the Messiah, who never arrives. You're constantly waiting for the Messiah, praying, hoping, working, waiting. But yet the Messiah is always eschatological, is to come. And Caputo orients us, says almost religion is eschatological in its nature. Richard Boothby, he is more Lacanian, and I'm closer now to Boothby's work, but he talks beautifully about Christianity at its best, at its core, being an invitation to love, and to love your enemy. And he has this beautiful ability to reflect on what that means at a very deep level, which is to love is to be open to a dimension of the other that is unknown and unknowable. Right? Whenever you kind of have somebody on a dating app who fits lots of criteria, that's one thing, that's great. But love is a connection not to all of these features that person has, but to a dimension of the other that is unknowable to them and to you. And it's dangerous, because that dimension of the other is the one who can hurt you more than anybody else in the world. The person who is most familiar to you can do the most unfamiliar thing that will not just surprise you, but surprise them. And to love is somehow to be able to remain open to that dimension of what's called the das Ding. And you'll see this in the reflection, the thing, this dimension of the other that is potentially monstrous. Many of you know that I've just finished work on a documentary called The Gospel According to Tammy Faye Baker, and it's about the life and the legacy of Tammy Faye Baker. And we're just in the process of trying to sell it now. But the reason why we decided to make that doc many years ago was because Tammy Faye Baker, for me, represented someone who could not close themselves off to others, to the toxic dimension of others. She loved everybody, and when people attacked her and ridiculed her, she somehow was able to embrace them and laugh with them and win them over. Now, it was to her detriment. It was probably partly what killed her, but it was a beautiful life, a life of somehow this almost living up to this radical, impossible invitation to love your neighbour and to love your enemy. So Boothby has a beautiful reflection on that. And then we have Zizek, who reflects on the idea that all of reality is divided. All of reality has a type of unknowing within it. It's not just that I have unknowing, but I can imagine, say, God knows everything. It's like the God or the absolute has unknowing as well. Unknowing is riven into everything. And actually, the way to find a type of salvation is to realize that the alienation you feel in yourself is not something to overcome, but is actually within all of reality. So you overcome alienation by realizing that alienation is an inherent part of what it is to be human. And the experience of alienation is anxiety. So there's something about anxiety that is the truth of our very being, right? That we often want to run from and escape from, but there's a truth in anxiety, and even a way to embrace and affirm it, which is difficult sometimes. And then Todd McGowan's work is also on this idea of a radical nothingness or lack in the heart of everything, and he looks at how do we build political movements around this notion. What does it mean to have a social life around this notion of negativity? I'm going to use one example before I finish this up. I'm writing a book again at the moment. I've had a book that I've wanted to write for a long time. I'm back to writing, thank goodness. And this week I was writing on the work of Gödel, the mathematician. And so I'm going to use him as an example to understand what's going on in this week that you're about to hit. And Gödel's incompleteness theorems are very complicated. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not going to explain them mathematically. I'm going to explain them using a metaphor or an analogy that I can't remember who came up with this analogy. It wasn't me, but it'll help you understand what Gödel's about and what maybe these thinkers are exploring. So in a nutshell, what Gödel proved and showed mathematically is he showed that a system that is total and computable has within it something that is true and not computable. So I'll explain what that means a bit, but just want to say it again so you've got it in your head. You've got computable reality, and computable just means anything that can be understood, anything that could be worked out. Right? So there's computable reality, and Gödel said that any system that attempts to be complete and total, there will always be something incomplete. There'll always be a dimension within computable reality that is not computable, but that is true but not computable. Right? So I'm very fascinated in this idea, and I've got very into the physicist and mathematician Roger Penrose, and I might even do something about him in future Paro seminars. But one way to understand this is to imagine that we can build what's called a universal truth machine. Right? This is a computer that can know anything that's knowable, it can know, it can prove. So whatever you program into this computer, it will generate a proof for that, right? So it can know and prove anything you put into it. So what Gödel does is he decides to mess this machine up, and he creates a statement, right? So any statement can be made if it's consistent. You put it into this machine and it will prove it to be true or not. And so Gödel, in this analogy, says, okay, G equals, so G is the algebraic term, so G equals the statement, right? And the statement is, the universal truth machine will never be able to prove that this statement is true, that G is true. Right? So basically you're feeding this statement in. The universal truth machine will not be able to prove that this is true. You feed that into the universal truth machine. Now the universal truth machine has a problem, because if it proves it's true, then in doing it, it proves that it's untrue, because it says the universal truth machine will never prove that this is true. So it can't prove that it's true, but it can't say it's false. It just can't do anything with it. So you have a system, and you have this non-computable dimension to the system, right? Now, the reason why I say that is there is a theory of the universe, and Roger Penrose is somebody who puts this forward, that the universe, everything that's computable, everything, the natural universe, the material universe, always comes along with a non-computable truth, a dimension that is not part of the whole, but also not separate from it. And Roger Penrose calls this proto-consciousness. So proto-consciousness is the universe always has this excremental remainder. Because if you think of what consciousness is a second-order reflection, a type of observation on embedded reality. And this is fascinating because there is a problem in physics about how to collapse what's called the wave function, right? Pure potentiality, superposition, all that, how to crunch that into something, and this idea that some sort of observation is required. Well, using the work of Gödel, you can say that the universe always has a type of observation. It always has something that's in it, but not of it, right? The reason for saying all of that is each of these thinkers are kind of exploring something like that. They're saying that, because these people aren't in the church, most of them. This is where it's increasingly hard to know whether these people would fit as theists or atheists, right? The ones that you're reading this week. They're all very much Christian. They all affirm Christianity, but you'd be hard-pressed to say whether they fit neatly in theism or atheism. But what each of them are saying is that in reality, as it's constructed, there is a dimension that is true, but not computable. A dimension that is real, but doesn't fit with reality. And they're all interested in orienting us to that, not shutting that off. And a lot of these thinkers would basically be wary of either scientism that says, oh, this dimension doesn't exist, or a type of religious idolatry that kind of tries to name it. It's kind of like, no, there's a truth that is not reducible to understanding. But it is something that has effect. It is something that we can orient ourselves to. And each of these thinkers believe that Christianity expresses this in very profound forms. Okay, so that is what you're going to get this week. I'm very excited if it's your first time. The Zizek one's interesting because I have two options for you. It's like choose your own adventure. If you've done previous years of Atheism for Lent, there's one that's, well, it's the same one as last year, but you can listen to that. But if you haven't, if you haven't done previous Atheism for Lent, I would do the second choice, right? There's two choices, and so you'll see it when you get the email. So either one's fine, but as I say, I've just got two in there, so you can pick which one you want to do. All right, I'm going to look, see if there's any questions, and then I'll let you go. Hello. Question, Chris. In my early life, it was definitely true that few talked of mystical experience. It was probably justified for general theorists to discount the mystical experience. However, some recent surveys have indicated approaching 50% of people admitting to something like a mystical experience. Are we getting toward the point where we can discount those who discount mysticism? You know, this our eternal back and forth, Chris. That's interesting, actually, what you're saying. And the interesting thing is, like, I think many of us, if not all of us, can think about a time when maybe we have experienced something that really just messes us up, short circuits us. The difficulty is, and I think Marion is brilliant on this, Jean-Luc Marion, he outlines that the experience of being short-circuited is actually common. You don't have to believe in God for that or anything. Like, there's versions of that where, whether it's a traumatic event, like an explosion happens in war, or it can be in a sexual encounter, or it can be looking at art. He kind of goes through various experiences where we can feel overwhelmed. And what he wants to say is that the religious experience is a particular type of being overwhelmed that happens at 4 simultaneous levels or whatever, right? Now, even if 50% of people kind of experience that or feel that they have at some point, that is still very different from someone like Paul Tillich or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because what they're saying is, in a sense, especially it's very clear in Tillich, is that this is something that everybody experiences all the time. Not some people some of the time, or even all people some of the time. Ultimate concern is always at work all of the time. And so religion, it's almost like we're all in religion and we're all experiencing something of this otherwise than being. But what we do is we shut ourselves down from it. And actually this week that's coming up, and you'll know these thinkers, you know them well, but this week is similar to last week, because each of these thinkers this week are saying that we want to shut down this dimension of the unknown. So for Boothby, we do want to love our enemy, which, and by the way, to love our enemy means to, in a sense, encounter the dimension of their own unknown enjoyment. There's like a certain sense in which the other has weird practices and beliefs and forms of enjoyment that we find disgusting, and so to love is to kind of keep yourself open to that dimension. So Boothby would say it's really, really hard to do. It's very hard to be like Tammy Faye Baker, and we all have to shut ourselves off at times. But what does it mean to try to stay open to our enemy, try to listen to them and not write them off, and to see that they are as divided as we are. So each of these thinkers, and Zizek's doing a similar thing, and McGowan, are saying that all of us are riven with this unknowing. All of us have this truth that is not computable, right? All of us experience the ultimate concern. All of us experience a sense that there is something that is beyond utilitarian calculation. But we want to shut ourselves down from that. And their work is very much going like, how do we maintain an openness and a fidelity to that nothingness and not shut it down? Anyway, just waffling now, but thank you. I see other things coming up. Jadel says, would Girard fit into this week's theme? That's a very good question. Let me just think. He definitely would have fitted very neatly in last week's. And in fact, I'm surprised I've never put Girard into Atheism for Lent. I know I have thought about it in the past, so I'll maybe do that for next year. Girard very much fits into, especially last week, because just very quickly, you know this, but for everybody else, but for Girard, who was this very brilliant kind of anthropologist and literary theorist, he had a Christology that was not about, was neither progressive in the sense of like Jesus died because he was a good person, you stand up to bad people and they'll crucify you, right? Which I don't think is even a Christology. That's just like, right? But you've got that kind of notion, and then you've got like conservative notions of Christology, which is, Christ died for the sins of the people, and as a, there's a few versions of it, but either to pay Satan with blood for our souls, or to appease God's wrath, whatever. Girard offered a Christology as what I would say biting as the conservatives, like as kind of interesting, but without kind of like any reference to to God and the devil or anything like that. It was very much a Christology that is deeply rooted in this notion of breaking the scapegoating mechanism and encountering our own violence and, exposing how our desire functions, etc., etc. Very, very cool stuff. So he would have fitted very neatly with last week, because I guess if I was saying that last week are thinkers who point towards an institution that doesn't exist yet, I would say, yeah, Girard fits very neatly into that. Although he was, I think, a very committed Catholic, if I know, to have an institution that did justice to his Christology, I think he was kind of, it was a prophetic look into some future thing. So yeah, glad you brought Girard up. He deserves to be in there, and I should do some work on Girard this year. Let's see. Question: why did you remove? Who did I remove? Why did I remove? Darren Brown. I enjoyed his contributions in the past, especially in light of how the brain experiences mystical reality. Well, you know what? And that's Lavone. I will be butchering your name. I apologise if that is your name or your tag. Yes. For everybody else, I used to have Darren Brown as part of Atheism for Lent, and you can look him up. Very good. Darren Brown was an illusionist, and he is an illusionist and a magician from the UK. Very big here, less big in America. And he used to be an evangelical Christian, and he has done a number of shows that mix magic and mentalism, but he also just does stuff occasionally that is not magic at all, but just tries to show how people can be persuaded and manipulated. And he has done shows like one where he converted an atheist, and he has done a variety of shows to kind of show how easy it is to take someone who says they don't believe and to kind of evoke that belief. Anyway, I took him out. Why did I take him out? One minor reason is, annoyingly, the videos that I had included, some places in the world, they couldn't access them. So whenever you clicked on the video, if you were in Australia, for example, it would come up no copyright. But apart from that, I can't quite remember why. That was probably the main reason. But I'll stick him back in maybe next year. And anybody who's watching this, go check out Darren Brown. He's very good. And one last one. Do you have any examples of how these authors or others, which could include communities? Do you have any examples of how these authors or others could include communities practice the orientation? Okay, yes, I think, sorry, I'm just, whenever you read these things, I think you're asking, yes, examples of how to do this in community, how to orient yourself to this estrangement in daily life. That's a great question, and that sets us up very well for next week, because next week is where we get into pyrotheology and my interest, which is exactly that. So yes, I will not say too much now, except I love that question. I think that's what all of this is moving towards, is how does this look? And if pyrotheology has anything to offer, it's something to do with that question. I mean, the way I've just set this up is I've kind of said that last week these thinkers were pointing towards a type of institution that doesn't exist, and then this week I think there's just very rich theory about this otherwise than being. That's my secret setup to talk about pyrotheology as an attempt to give one example of what that new religious collective might look like, and how that will be lived out. And I call it many things at the moment. I like the term Church of the Contradiction, just to talk about some stuff that I'm working on at the moment. So I will leave that to next week. Wonderful. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you still being involved and part of this. I'll be seeing some of you in June, and I will talk to you next week. Oh, and remember, the processing room, if you're interested, is happening in 40 minutes. And there's a link in the website just to talk about last week. I highly recommend that. All right, take care. Bye-bye.